Now, I mentioned Ken Bain before. We could think about when people learn the best and when they learn most deeply. Bain would argue, and I agree with him, that people learn best and most deeply when they try to answer questions or solve problems that they find interesting, intriguing, important, or beautiful. For me, this is a very important principle, so that whenever I begin an executive education program, working with a client or through our executive education system, I always want to begin with what are the biggest problems that are facing you. Now, in other parts of the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, people are flummoxed by this. In fact, many North Americans, South Americans as well, are flummoxed by this because they're not used to that. They're used to the facilitator or the instructor telling them, this is what you're going to need to learn. I think it's much more powerful from a learning and therefore an effectiveness of learning point of view to begin with the issues that they're facing. So if you can, in the first hour, get your audience to talk about what's the biggest problem in your life, and that could be financial, it could be educational, it could be social, it could be any number of things. And many people say, whoa, you know, this is too soon. I don't know you. Too much information. Why should I share that? I'll share some of mine, the issues I'm dealing with. And then I'll write these on the flip charts, these 3M Post-it flip charts, and put them on the wall so that we can refer back to them during the course of the seminar. I want to start with their agenda, not mine. People learn best when they can try new things and get feedback immediately. This is one of the reasons I really like role-playing in class, but case method in general facilitates this principle because people will read the same case, they'll have conversations about it, somebody else will say, well, I look at it this way, another person looks at it this way, and they get immediate feedback as to whether in the court of their peers their ideas and their thought processes are acceptable, palatable, and convincing. And if they're not, that's useful feedback, regardless of what the professor says. Now, sometimes the professor or the facilitator takes on a life larger than they should because they're giving grades. And then we go back to this issue of strategic or instrumental learning. And so what do I have to do to get an A is the bad question, I think. The better question is, how can I learn the most to facilitate my life out of this course? They work collaboratively with other learners struggling with the same problems. So case method is built around this whole issue. Struggling with the same problems, we're going to bring those problems into the classroom. But working in the learning teams as well is another way that collaboratively, and in the classroom as a whole collaboratively, they get a chance to, together, try to solve a set of issues that the case method class will put in front of them. They face repeated challenges to their existing fundamental paradigms. So there's nothing better to challenging your paradigm than you having to deal with an issue, describe the challenges that you're feeling. I would call them Weber abrasions, where your values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations are being confronted or challenged by what's happening in the case or what's happening in the discussion. And that happens on a class-by-class daily basis. So they care that their existing paradigms don't work. So in a business school where people are thinking about their careers and going out and taking a job in industry, and they're dealing on a daily basis with the problems that industries face, this is a great opportunity for people to say, wait a minute, my paradigm isn't working. It's important to me because I want to succeed in my career. It's my life after all. So case method will address this issue very directly. So if people don't care whether or not their existing paradigms, that is their vabes about the way the world is, work or not, then they're not going to be engaged in your course. So when you have a case method discussion where people are arguing about their assumptions about the world of business and how you would solve this particular problem are challenged by or refuted by their classmates, then this becomes a big issue because it's going to affect their career. They get emotional, physical, and intellectual support when they need it. This is an issue, I suppose, with any educational system, and in the CASE method, our classes, our sections, we have 5 sections, A through E, sections will band together as a group and support each other. That also happens in learning teams, so that they make rules and they explicitly talk about them, that we may disagree with the assertion, but we're not going to attack the person. So people who have a tendency to do that will find themselves brought up short, and the peer pressure of the group will teach people that be careful, because if you laugh at somebody else may laugh at you. You want to be careful that you treat people professionally and with courtesy, even though you may or may not agree with what they actually have to say. People learn best if they feel in control of their own learning and not manipulated. So CASE method excels at this approach. Yes, the instructor may be shaping the discussion by the questions that they ask, and what a person learns from any individual session will be unique to that person. The instructor may have some ideas about how to manage one part of a discussion or an analytic technique, and if the students disagree and they want to or they don't understand it, they can do that. Again, depending on how you as the facilitator run the discussion, and we've talked about that in other segments. They believe that their work will be considered fairly and honestly. This one is a challenge in CASE method, although if you keep careful data and students come in to complain about the grades they got, and you can show them exactly how many times they participated in class, your assessment of each of their comments, maybe had sent them some emails, and you can look at their final exam and point out where it was strong or not so strong. You usually have very good data to present a convincing case to students that I think what you earned was fair. Compared to a true or false or a multiple choice exam where students can look exactly and there's no quote-unquote subjectivity in the assessment, CASE method with regard to exam and assessments is more subjective, less objective, and therefore open to criticism. We always get, I would say, 1 or 2 students who are frustrated by that and want to come in and argue and complain about what they were trying to do in the case, but either didn't or the faculty member didn't read it properly. But those are in the minority. They believe that their work will matter. So I think Bain's notion here is that if you're learning how to weld, and welding is an essential part of what your company is doing, then people will be more attentive to their learning and educational opportunities. They're happening to experience translations when they try to weld. So will their work matter? In the CASE method environment, when you're individually preparing a case, preparing it in your learning team, and you know that you may well be called on the next day to speak, your number may come up by chance. You may be called on to offer your thoughts at any moment in the discussion. It's very clear that this creates a mattering for the work that you're doing, which is one of the reasons we like to have learning teams, so that everybody has a chance to express their views. In a group of 65 or 90 students, that may not happen on any particular class session. But your work matters because if you're called on, you don't want to be embarrassed in front of your peers. You want to be able to present your analysis, and you've had an opportunity to do that in your learning team already. So everybody, and if you use buzz groups in your class, then everybody can share their thoughts with their neighbors, and not feel like all of that studying was just flushed down the drain and you didn't have an opportunity to present it. They believe that intelligence and abilities are expandable and that they can get better at it. So this is an issue with any educational experience. If I try, will I get better? Is it possible? In other words, my assumption or my expectation about effort put in will yield learning coming out. Now, sometimes in case methods, students don't see that between individual classes. It may take a semester. When they go home for winter break, they come back and say, wow, I had no idea how much I'd learned about the telephone industry or about the computer industry or about how you assess the economic stability of a country, until I went home and started seeing stuff on the news or talking with my parents or some of my peers, and I realized how much I've picked up. So if students believe that no matter how hard they try, they're never going to understand how to make a decision tree and succeed at decision analysis, or figuring out a bottleneck in operations, or understanding how the national accounts work in a national economy. Each case, if they get a little bit better and a little bit better, think back to our discussion about complexity in modules. If you start with high complexity and you go down low and they build to the point where they can learn more, then that addresses this particular issue. They believe that other people have faith in their ability to learn. So we have faith in our students with the case method because we know that people can read, we expect them to read, and we expect that if they read, and also the technical note or the framework that was assigned with that module or that case, and we call on them, it's because we believe that they can pick it up, and we do that day after day, 3 times a day in the required curriculum, 4 times a day in the elective curriculum. They can pick up and go as fast as they want to, and we believe in that, and it's evident in our entire case method system. They believe that they can learn and that these efforts that we're making will actually increase and add to their ability to function in a business, run a business, manage a business. So if we take Ken Bain's notions of when people learn the best, in my view, case method is an extraordinarily well-suited strategy for addressing these 12 learning points. Now, there are other learning styles, of course, depending on, again, what's your theory of how people learn. Some of you may be advocates of neuro-linguistic programming, for example. We've talked about this in other segments. Some of you may adhere to Gardner's various types of intelligence and may be thinking about how they relate to what people take away from the classroom. Some of you may have heard about, employed, or been interested in mind mapping, a technique that was developed by Tony Buzan, and several books have been written about this. It's an attempt to mirror more closely the linkages that we see in our minds physiologically with a topic. So it's a system that goes against what we're typically taught early in school, how to do an outline, which is a sequential process, whereas mind mapping tries to mirror the random access and nonlinear, non-sequential structures that we have in our brains. So here's a mind map, for example, of the uses for mind mapping. Here's one that might reflect leadership and how leadership unfolds, particularly in the case of Mahatma Gandhi. And again, different people would draw this in different ways. But the question is, how do people learn best? What is your philosophy about how people learn? And if you have habitual ways of thinking about learning and teaching, are you able to adapt your habitual style to accommodate the learning styles of others? Are you willing, are you able to adapt your own habitual style to facilitate the learning of the people in the room who come to you with a different educational background, with different life experiences, different cultural experiences, different assumptions about religion, about politics, about relationships, about deference and respect, who have different ways physiologically because of their brain chemistry, because of the way they were taught growing up, how to learn. And if you don't have in mind your own theory about how people learn and have some flexibility in utilizing that theory so that you could touch and encourage and support and strengthen people with different backgrounds and different preferred learning styles, then your efforts to facilitate learning will be inhibited, and much less than they otherwise could be. So this is an invitation for you to think seriously about your own model of how people learn, to put that on paper so that you can see it in front of you and think about it and reflect on it, and then to apply that in your learning with your students and observe the results that you get to see whether or not their level of buy-in, their level of depth of learning from your educational experiences are deep, are superficial, are core, are peripheral, and that's what you're trying to manage when you go into the classroom.